Hello there. Sorry about that. Can you hear me all okay? I had to go grab my water. Okay, so net neutrality. Deadline for comments to the FCC for the first round are tomorrow evening. Then the second round of comments, which includes responding to comments that have already been filed, which may, if you want, include the robo comments, the something like 2.6 million of them that have been filed at this point on a form letter with stolen info in many cases, identity theft info rather. That deadline is August 16th, and I strongly recommend you submit. First, before we take any questions, although if we do have any questions, feel free to either bash them out in the chat here, send them via Twitter, or email them to me. I have everything lined up and ready to read your tweets. And your emails. So, with that in mind, let's go back to history a little. So, what happened? 10 years ago, not long after I started with TorrentFreak, I got a research request, and that was to look into some reports that Comcast was giving BitTorrent users a little bit of a problem. So I went out and I contacted some friends of friends, and came back with a bunch of people all using Comcast, and a few who weren't, who were my test beds, my double blinds, so to speak. And we spent a week, maybe 2 weeks, testing BitTorrent, and we found that Comcast users, when connecting outside Comcast especially, could not make and sustain a BitTorrent connection, which was odd, which is very, very odd. So we went away again, we looked at the packets, the data packets, and we found that what Comcast was doing was sending a reset packet, one to this end and one to the other end. And these packets did not come from the other side, they came from a point in the middle, Comcast. And these packets are called reset packets, or RST packets. And they were sent to either side, pretending to be from the other person. And that RST packet closes the connection between them. So imagine there's a phone call, and I'm on the phone, you're on the phone, and midway through a call, or as the call's getting started, the phone company breaks into the call and makes it seem like the other person has hung up on you. That's what this effectively is. It's making out that it's the other person has decided to end the connection with you. At the same time, the other person is getting a message from the telephone operator that you've decided to end the connection with them. So it's like the telephone operator has said, okay, I got to go now, bye. And then puts the phone down. That's not good for sustaining a connection. I mean, one side could decide to ignore those notices and say, yeah, well, they said it's gone, but I'm just going to hang on the phone just in case. It doesn't matter, because the other side has gotten the same message, and unless it decides to say, no, I'm going to ignore this, and hang up, and doesn't say, okay, well, he hung up on me, Only if both sides ignore the message can the connection be sustained. Just like if both people need to not put the phone down to keep a phone conversation going. If one does, then that's the end of that. So, with this information, we at TorrentFreak went and published a story, and the story is Comcast interferes with BitTorrent, seeding impossible. And it was quite revelatory, and a lot of people then came forward and said, yes, we also have problems when it comes to seeding. Not just the few, the dozen or two that I'd tested all across the country, but we're talking all over the country. Not just a dozen or so, hand-picked, cherry-picked. We're talking hundreds. And that got us to start pressuring Comcast. And they said, well, what are you doing? And they said, we're not doing anything. Remember that? It's a common phrase of theirs. In fact, their spokesman from the, when somebody else got their Comcast spokesman, they said, we are not blocking access to any application and we don't throttle any traffic. That was Comcast spokesman Charlie Douglas. It's true, they weren't blocking access to any application. BitTorrent's a protocol, not an application. So, picking their words, and we don't throttle any traffic. They weren't throttling it, they weren't slowing it down, they were terminating it entirely. And they were doing so using what is called a man-in-the-middle attack. That's where the man in the middle pretends to be each side of the conversation to the other person. It's, you have two entities, and then a third one pops up, and instead of these two talking, the middle is talking to these instead. So you have two localized connections, and they don't get the big connection between them. So that's not good for connection health. And so after a while, it carried on, and then the consumer affairs website, The Consumerist, managed to get hold of a manual from Comcast that was distributed, I think, to the higher up techs. And in that in that manual was a talking points, basically, that said this shouldn't be done, and also that it should not be mentioned to any customers if they're coming out, they're if they're talking about, if customers are asking about this blocking, just to say, we're not blocking access to an application and we don't throttle any traffic. That was basically the go-to, the phrasing. It's true, but it's not what was asked. Following that, both the Electronic Frontier Foundation, yay them, and the Associated Press, unusually for them, did their own testing. And their testing confirmed what we said. This testing was, October or so? So we'd reported August 17th, and this is now October, and two other entities have now verified our claims. So where do we go from there? Well, again, Comcast claimed, no, we're not really doing it. This got a couple of entities to file a lawsuit, and the lawsuit was filed with the, well, not a lawsuit, a complaint was filed with the FCC over this blocking technique, this man-in-the-middle attack. So we start then with FCC hearings, and in February of 2008 there was a hearing at Harvard University. Public hearing. There was a few people, there was a couple of people from the various MIT computer departments, and a man named Richard Bennett, who claims to be the co-inventor or the inventor of the twisted pair over Ethernet standard. If you read other things, he's just the vice chair of the group that did it, and the more you read, the less he actually is involved with it. So there's a big habit of overstating things. But he stated, let's see if I have this here, that there was no need for net neutrality, that it wasn't a real thing, it wasn't a problem, it wasn't an issue. And these other people, David Reed of the MIT Media Lab, said that in doing these kinds of practices, Comcast shouldn't call themselves an internet service provider, but a company offering selective access to portions of the net only. That's basically the key phrase when it comes to net neutrality. The difference between being an ISP and a company that offers select access to certain parts of the net only. Daniel Schweizer called the Sandvine system that Comcast was using to do this a hacker technique, and that it is. It's a man-in-the-middle attack. So we've got these things, but I don't think the commissioner's really got the sense of how angry this is making a lot of the public, and there's a reason for that. Part of the thing about a public hearing is people get to sit in and watch. They get to sit in and they react to the testimony. If you're watching this, you've probably been getting a little incensed if you didn't know about this, about Comcast actions, and you're getting a little bit angry, and your body language changes, your posture changes. You can feel the hostility. Didn't really happen at this hearing, and that's because Comcast decided to pay seat warmers, basically people who were there to fill up space and stop anybody who was actually interested, had a stake, knew what was talking about, would be incensed, give off this negative vibes when people like Mr. Bennett were speaking, and would give the thing. And they also didn't give the positive vibes when Schweitzer and Reed and so were talking, because they weren't interested. They were paid to just be there. They had no interest in what was going on. They didn't have to pay attention to what was going on. They were there to block seats and keep people who were legitimately interested from attending. So with that, they decided to hold a second hearing at Stanford, which didn't go quite Comcast's way so much. There was a lot more public outrage. Following on from all of this, long story short, Comcast made a filing to the FCC in responding to this that said, yes, okay, we do it, but we're only doing it at peak times to manage network congestion. So it's all okay. It's only because we're doing it when it's congested. Ah, boy. The problem with that is there's yet another set of tests got done. The Max Planck Institute in, I think, Germany, or is it Austria? One of the two. Made a test, a little application on a website called Glasnost, and it was an automated test that you could use to test your internet connection for BitTorrent using their own servers. It's fully automated. It saved a lot of the problems and time and effort that we'd spent, the summer before, manually identifying the problems, and it did a nice little test. There's a little Java applet on a website. You clicked it, you waited 5 minutes, and you got the results. Simple. Well, in May 2008, not long after these hearings, they released their first batch of data. And it showed that over 700 persistent users, which Max Planck Institute had tested repeatedly at times, only 1 hour of the day between 11 and midnight at night was the less than 50% of those tested being throttled. So unless every member of the persistent test group they had was throttled on a heavily saturated connection all the time, there's no way that was true. We're talking about Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And we're talking all hours of the day. We're talking from midnight to 11 p.m. At least 50% of all tested clients had this Sandvine throttling. So either Comcast was lying in their response to the FCC, not a good thing to do, don't recommend it. Or Comcast had so incredibly oversold their line capacities and that was then saturated to the point of uselessness that they had to do these excessive techniques constantly, that perhaps the FTC should be involved over fraudulent selling, because they were selling things they had no ability or desire to provide. They went with the FCC option. So in August of 2008, the FCC issued an order saying they can't do this discriminatory network management practice by the end of the year. So they had 5 months, August to the end of December 2008, to end this practice. And again, by the way, if anybody has any questions, wants any clarification or anything, shout it out in the chat here, send it by Twitter, send it by email. If you got it's easier to clarify now than later. But Comcast said, okay, we won't do it, but then sued and appealed to the DC Court of Appeal. And in April 2010, the DC Appeals Court said, no, you don't have that power, to the FCC. You can't make that ruling, you can't make that determination, you can't force Comcast not to do that. Oh boy. So it's now April 2010. This practice has been going on since April, May 2007. We first reported on it in August 2007. And so 3 years on, not a huge change. Back basically where we started, except Comcast has promised they really won't do it again. But the FCC knows this is now a problem and has to come up with other things. So it decides to bring up the Open Internet Order, which it issues in, let's see, where is it? It's later in 2010, shortly after the court struck it down. It basically encapsulates and codifies what are called the 4 freedoms that the FCC had adapted as the basis of an open and free internet. And those bases are: consumers deserve access to the lawful internet content of their choice. Consumers should be allowed to run applications and use services of their choice subject to the needs of law enforcement. Consumers should be able to connect their device, their choice of legal device that does not harm the network, and consumers deserve to choose their network providers, applications and service providers, and content providers of choice. So basically with that, those are the 4 principles of the open internet that they'd established in 2005. And this Comcast Sandvine system violated the first one, access to lawful internet content of their choice. That it was blocking the second one, run applications and use services of their choice. And it was infringing on the fourth one, deserve to use the network providers, applications and service providers and content providers of choice. Bit of a stretch on that last one, but it does happen with some things such as World of Warcraft. Now, some people would say, yes, but BitTorrent's mainly used for infringing copyright. Yes, but when I did the testing, I used data that I'd created specifically for the test. When the Associated Press did their test, they used the Bible. There was absolutely no infringement there, so it was just data that was there, and they were blocking and managing. So it violated these these 4 things, which were then codified into the Open Internet Order. This essentially established net neutrality for all ISPs in the United States. Some didn't like that. Verizon sued. And in 2014, can you guess what happened? The DC Federal Appeals Court ruled that the order couldn't be applied. to come to ISPs under current classification only to common carriers, which ISPs weren't anymore. So yes, anymore. So we then go on to the big deal, which was 2015 and the reclassification under Title II. This was at the prodding of that court ruling in Verizon versus FCC. And it stated that common carriers, which the telephone lines had been, are subject to these sorts of regulations, whereas information services, which is what Internet ISPs had been, are not. Now, there'll be a lot of people like Ajit Pai, the current FCC commissioner, who thinks that this reclassification is a bad thing, and it harms innovation and disrupts investment, other things like that. Nonsense. Because until 2000 and let's see, what is it? August 2005, DSL and dial-up, which were at the time pretty much the fastest and most widely available sources of internet in the United States, those were classified under Title II. Cable, because of its connection to the legacy cable industry, and cable TV is the quintessential Title I service, were classified under Title I. So it wasn't until 2005 that we had DSL and dial-up and on Title II and cable internet on Title I, and in 2005 the Republican-led FCC reclassified them both as Title I. This was supposedly just to put them all onto a level footing. But when people talk about the dangers of government reclassification and traditionally it didn't matter and everything, what they're omitting is that the vast majority of its life, internet service providers in the US were Title II. It was only the more niche, at that time, cable internet providers that were under Title I. And it wasn't until this desire to spur innovation and foster investment that was reclassified to Title I. And it didn't really work. I was in the UK until 2003. We had no cable internet, and we had no DSL where I lived in a major city. We did have dial-up, and that dial-up was a lot faster than any dial-up you could get in the US. It literally was right to the 56k limit, whereas in the US it was limited a bit. In the US, when I came to the US, DSL was faster than cable internet. After the reclassification, things didn't expand quite as well. I lived in a small town in a rural county in Georgia, and it's called Monticello. If you've ever seen the movie My Cousin Vinny, that's Monticello that it's set in. Well, it's not set in, that's where it actually filmed. 3,000 people in the town, 1,000 square kilometers, and 9,000, 10,000 people total, over 1,000 square kilometers. It's kind of rural. In 2006, we had 6 megabit down, half a megabit up DSL from AT&T. When I moved from there in 2014, we had 6 megabit down, half megabit up DSL from AT&T. That was it. In 8 years, there had been absolutely no investment, no upgrades, and not even a slight price cut. It was still the exact same price in 2014 as it was in 2006. Because they could. They had no competition. There was talk of investing in upgrading to fiber, to the AT&T Uverse system. That was talked about in 2007. It was promised, and I was told the fiber's in the offices in 2008. It never got installed. Why would it? They didn't need to now. As an information service, they had less rules, they had less regulations, and less need to compete. DSL had to compete until then as it was under a Title II, and therefore had to keep up in some ways because it was under such stronger restrictions, as was cell phones, as was telephone service. But now it's not. So we have these fibs and lies about why we could have to reclassify back down to Title I. And it's odd, but I don't know about many people here, but is the internet to you more of a telephone system where there's two-way communication? I'm talking to you right now. You can all talk back to me. Or is it like a cable TV system where only the very select few who get to control what gets said, and they get to control the pipes and what is broadcast to people's houses? And as an information service, a service that provides information to somebody else. Title II is a communication system, which is a two-way communication system where it can be used in any way. I can talk to whoever I want using it, and whoever I wants to can talk to me using it. That's Title II. I think you'll all agree Title II is quite clearly the way to go. But again, others disagreed. So after the 2015 reclassification, ISPs sued. This time, the ISPs lost. The Title II reclassification was pretty much pointed at by the courts in the Verizon ruling in 2014, saying if you want to do this kind of regulation, you have to reclassify. You have that authority. And then the court said, yes, you do have that authority. You have reclassified it. Yes, okay. So, that's what's going on there. That is where we're at right now. So, following the 2016 presidential election, the FCC is run by the presidential party. It's an executive branch agency, so it's run by the head of the executive branch, or rather at the favor of the executive branch. So when Trump won, he nominated FCC Commissioner Ajit Pai to be FCC chairman, and the current chairman, Wheeler, stepped down. Pai has made no bones about his hatred of net neutrality and Title II regulation. He's had a lot of legal background. He's a former Verizon lawyer. He's also worked for the Senate or the House, for Congress as a counsel, and for several committees. But he seems to have this Republican obsession with lack of regulations, and that any regulation is a bad regulation. So, who knows? He likes to wander around with his comically oversized Reese's cup and talk about how he wants light touch regulation. It already is light touch. Net neutrality is not a system of the government says you must. Net neutrality is a system of the government says ISPs can't. That's a huge difference. It's not saying you must go into this narrow path and you must follow this narrow path and stay within this path. Instead, it's you cannot go into this little thing on the outside. You can do anything you want in this big space, but just these little things where it's beyond the pale, that you can't do. So that's the difference between what's proposed and what's actually happened. Others have said, with these kinds of regulations, the common carrier, then we're going to get lack of investment. Not true. As with everything with these telecom investments, there's a lot of double standards. Many remember Trump openly boasting of Charter's was a $20 billion investment as growing the economy and Trumponomics works. Except Charter had announced that the year before. So that's a little undermining of the claims. And then we have these comments and claims again, let me see if I can pull up the comment now that has been the talking point of the of the comments, and it's the unprecedented regulatory power the Obama administration imposed on the internet is smothering innovation, damaging the American economy, and obstructing job creation. Bullshit. I urge the Federal Communication Commission to end the bureaucratic regulatory overreach of the internet known as Title II and restore the bipartisan, light-touch regulatory consensus that enabled the internet to flourish for more than 20 years. The plan currently under consideration of the FCC to repeal Obama's Title II power grab is a positive step forward and will help to promote a truly free and open internet for everyone. Let me break that down real quick, unless people have any questions. Again, if you have any questions, shout them out. The unprecedented regulatory power the Obama administration imposed on the internet is smothering innovation, damaging the American economy, and obstructing job creation. Nonsense. It's not unprecedented. As I explained earlier, the internet was under Title II regulation until August 2005. And there's been absolutely no evidence by anybody, including the ISPs, that it's damaged the economy and obstructed job creation. It's actually increased job creation because in having an open internet, it's allowed new startups, new companies to flourish. The only thing it's the damage the economy is that legacy incumbent large ISPs have not been able to manage things in order to push towards their own services. So it's harmed their bottom line, but that's not exactly the same thing. I mean, we have problems with disparity, rather, between what they're saying in public statements. Verizon has said, you know, we're going to, it's harming innovation. Here we go. Let's see. This is the chief CFO for Verizon. That's Fran Shamo. He'd said that it was not going to harm. It was going to harm things, but in a conference call with investors, where he legally has to tell the truth, he said that it's not going to hurt. So let's go with his testimony before Congress. He said, "I would emphasize that the approach, in whole or in part, on Title II is an extreme and risky path that will jeopardize our investment in the development of innovation in the broadband internet and related services." What innovation? Most of their rollouts are slow, antiquated, and using systems that have been tested elsewhere in the world. There's no real innovation there. So, in his investment calls, he's said it won't invest it. Here's his thing. I mean, to be real clear, I mean, this does not influence the way we invest. I mean, we're going to continue to invest in our networks and our platforms, both in wireless and wireline, Fios, and where we need to. So nothing will influence that. I mean, if you think about it, look, I mean, we're born out of a highly regulated company, so we know how this operates. That's kind of an undermining of his whole claim. And it's that way constantly. They'll say, yes, it's going to harm us, where they've got a public platform to say so for people who are easily misled or who like that sort of thing, but where they absolutely legally have to say the truth and how that affects their financial status, it's not going to affect us. We're going to continue doing it, like so and so and so on. That's where their statements can be are legally binding and can land them in jail if they are lying. So, are they lying to their investors and courting jail to make it sound good and sound rosy for their thing, or is it actually going to harm them? Gee, I don't know. I'll go with the fact that they're lying where they can get away with it, and they don't dare lie where they could go to jail. Right, so we've got that. We've got other things as well. I mean, I focused on this Sandvine because that's the core thing to the that's the core to how this came about. But there are other things as well. Smaller ISPs such as Madison River Communications in North Carolina, they blocked Vonage, which is a voice over IP service. The FCC sanctioned Madison River, but it didn't have that kind of authority, as the court made clear in 2010 with the Comcast versus Verizon claim over the net neutrality. Canada's done similar things. Now, I want to reiterate, this does not affect Canada, the UK, elsewhere. It affects only the US and US ISPs. And even then, it only affects wireline ones. That's fixed ones. It's not wireless-based ones, such as Verizon 4G, you know, on your cell phones. It doesn't affect WiMAX and other things if you've had Clear or other similar services. It doesn't affect those. It's focused only on wireline, to the main point. You know, but it happens in other countries, and they've got their own regulatory things, and they're often, some of them are waiting to see how this shakes out in the US. Other countries, like the UK, have not only got common carrier status, they have local loop and bundling. That means that where here I'm stuck with, say, Windstream or AT&T for phone service and DSL service, and either Comcast or Charter or Cox for cable service, depending on who's franchised, gotten exclusive contracts to run the thing. You can use any kind of DSL provider you want. Much like in the old dial-up days, where you didn't have to use your telephone company's DSL, you could use any DSL provider. So that's where things have shaken out, and you can get much faster connections in the UK than you can in the US, with the exceptions of now the very dense cities where some, in response to mainly Google's Google Fiber rollouts, in response to that, they've rolled out gigabit connections of their own. In Atlanta, there's gigabit. Now with AT&T, Comcast has pushed towards that as well in some areas to compete with that. And it's this competition that focuses and pushes investment, and it focuses and pushes competition and innovation in the space. Of course, we get negative innovations as well, such as AT&T deciding that if you want your privacy, then you can have $30 an extra added to your bill. Not the kind of innovation we want. But then we get to rural areas, such as the semi-rural Metro Atlanta area I live in now, and it is 2 providers, and one of them Charter, and there's one tier, and it's a 60 by 5. And it used to be 60 by 4, and it's been that since 2014. There's no alternatives. I could really do with more upload speed, but it's not available. And from speaking to various technicians at various levels of the company in and around the whole region, it's not likely to get any faster because they're not going to make the investment to do so. Why would they? They don't need to. The only alternative is DSL, which I believe, tops out at about 3 megabits down and 1.5 up. Right now, it may go to 6 down. But for several years, the FCC has defined broadband as 25 megabits down and I think 3 up. So DSL nowadays, following the reclassification from Title 2 to Title 1 in 2005, has stagnated. Title 1 reclassification hasn't increased investment, it's decreased it. It has said it's okay to languish. It's okay to not do anything because it's now an information service. And two-way communication isn't necessary, only a bare minimum one-way service is all that's needed. And it's ludicrous. So what are we to do with this? Well, the FCC has decided to reclassify at the behest, at the urging and at the direction of its chairman, Ajit Pai. There's a 3-2 Republican majority on the commission. So that's, again, it's an executive branch agency, so it switches its composition to match the executive branch's political party. The thing is, while they can reclassify in an order, it may not survive a challenge. Part of the problem is that legally their rules cannot be capricious. They have to show good reason for classifying, and that's where these comments come in. Specifically, they're supposed to say, we have this proposal, and we are going to ask people for comments, and then we're going to make a determination based on those comments. And we're going to read them all, and then we're going to determine based on what they're going to do. What they're not supposed to do is what they've actually done. And that is, Pai stated before the consultation even opened which way he wanted to go and which way he wanted to do things. And you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to actually go on the consultation. If you go into it with a predetermined thing, then there's no point in the consultation, and there's no point in the process. So he may have broken the law there. But more importantly, unless the FCC can show that the evidence proves that there needs to be a reclassification, then the inevitable court case, and there will be a court case, just as there was with the Title 2 reclassification, which ended up standing, and the Open Internet Order of 2009, which was knocked down by the courts in Verizon versus FCC, and the Comcast Net Neutrality Order, which was knocked down in Comcast versus FCC in 2010. There has to be shown good evidence to make these rules, that they have a grounding in law and that they have a grounding in fact, and they are not capricious, arbitrary, or otherwise done for the sake of being done. So, what do we need from this? Well, the deadline for those comments is tomorrow, at least the first batch of comments, as I said right at the very start of this video 45 minutes ago. The deadline for the second round of comments, which is responding to those comments, is August 16th. So you've got time for those. What you need to do is comment. Explain your current situation. Whatever you do, don't claim that it's a power grab, it's arbitrary, it's government control, etc. Deal with facts rather than assertions. And don't insult people. Completely useless. It's effectively a null comment. Comment about, if you've had an internet connection for a number of years, comment on how that's grown and how its price has changed over time. Have more speeds become available to you? Do you use faster speeds now? Do you use services that are in competition with your ISP? For instance, for cable companies, if you're using a cable internet connection, do you use something like Netflix or Hulu or YouTube? Do you use a voice over IP system? I have a voice over IP phone system through my ISP, hardware one, but I have software ones as well. And the imposition of, or the abolition of these network neutrality rules means that they could, again, if they wanted, disrupt my voice over IP sessions, including video hangouts, which I've used in this situation before to talk about Brexit. If you want to look in the history videos, they can disrupt Skype. They could disrupt any kind of video or phone calls because it interferes with their core businesses. FaceTime, that was actually one of the original things, is that in 2007 to 2009, AT&T forced Apple to block Skype and FaceTime on their cell phones, and said, no, you can't use that because that competes with our own offerings. There are other things as well. Windstream started hijacking search queries and did injections to redirect to their own toolbars and their own search engines. Instead of leaving packets to go to whichever service I wanted, they decided to hijack those sorts of things and redirect them to their own search engines, gaining them your search history and getting out to them, and forcing you to use the service they wanted you to use. I mean, we got there's plenty of examples of it. In 2012, AT&T forced FaceTime users to actually upgrade their plans to a expensive plan just to use one of the key selling points of the iPhone at the time, and they used that using this network management system that Comcast claimed to do this. So, cover anything about your internet connection. Do you have problems getting to services? Have you had slow video? Is your line overly congested at times? Have there been significant upgrades in your system over time, or others? Not your system, your connection over time. Do you use a lot more data now than you did then? Are data caps fair? Are data caps accurate? Are data caps even valid these days? I mean, you're talking about 4 cents a gigabyte is their cost for data, and Comcast is saying in certain things you've got a terabyte limit. That's 1,000 gigabytes. 1,000 times 4 cents. That's $40 at most. And everybody who doesn't use that, if they budget $40, I think there's no gigabit internet connection that costs $40. Everything over $40 cost is profit to them, and only if you're using over a gigabyte and other people are using half a gigabyte, then they're only using $20 and they've got $20 bonus. So this is, explain all these things, write about your experiences with internet service providers. Do they come out promptly when the internet goes down? Are they using fast systems? Have you had any issues? Do the DNS servers go down frequently? Because since they've made a key argument that it's necessary to reclassify the Title I for innovation and investment and everything else, show that under Title I from 2005 to 2015 it wasn't there, or that from 2015 onwards it hasn't changed. And you can say, yes, it's terrible service from 2015 onwards, but if it was terrible service from 2010 to 2015 as well, it's no change. And that reclassifying back to Title I won't suddenly give it a magic miracle investment. So I've talked now for 50 minutes, giving you a brief overview and a brief history of what net neutrality is and isn't. Are there any questions? Any comments? Any points of clarification? Anybody? Nobody? Nothing? I mean, if you want, I can go and look at certain comments that other people have made and claims. And see what they have to say. And I've seen quite a few people make silly comments about net neutrality. Here's one from a guy called Morb Capor on the ACLU's post about net neutrality. A guy named Evan Greer received $3 million from Google to organize the left against repealing the Obama-era reforms. It was a power grab and an illegal way of applying regulation. The 1930s phone regulation should only be applied by an act of Congress. So this guy is going to restore free market mechanics to the internet. Since that will cost Google, Facebook, and the like millions in fees, they are spending millions to convince you that without the regulations, fraud and racketeering would be legal. It's just not true. Let me... It's right there, Morb Cable. Okay. A guy named Evan Greer. Evan Greer is a woman. Is female. Received $3 million from Google to organize the left against repealing the Obama-era reforms. I don't know where she got funds or how much funds she's got. Not really a point, really. It was a power grab and an illegal way of applying regulation. Unfortunately, the courts disagree with you and say that it's a perfectly legal way, and in fact, the court suggested it. Geeks. The 1930s phone regulation should only be applied by an act of Congress. I agree with that. Congress should get off their asses and apply an actual net neutrality rule. Of course, they're not going to because they are pretty much dysfunctional at this point and have been for quite a while. So if they can't manage to do anything right now, I mean, in the US right now they're talking about healthcare and can't manage to formulate a half-decent healthcare bill, even though they've had 7.5 years to do so. So let's see, what else he said? So this guy is going to restore free market mechanics of the internet. Title II regulation does not disrupt free market regulation. It didn't when it was applied to DSL and dial-up back until 2005, and it didn't disrupt. It actually, the reclassification title one in some ways killed the free market mechanics because it reduced their impetus for competition. It meant that the natural monopolies of line installers locked people into certain providers and reduced competition. Since that will cost Google, Facebook, and the like millions in fees. The only way it would cost them is if ISPs start using packet disruption methods, or network manage. What was the term they used? Let me just look through my notes again. Discriminatory network management practices to divert people away from Google, as Windstream, as I said, did, or to block Facebook or to snarf advertising. That's the only way net neutrality abolition would harm the likes of Google and Facebook. So they're spending without the regulation, fraud and racketeering would be legal. In many ways, it's just crazy. Let's see. What else did he say? Sure, so instead of the ISP who made the investment in the bandwidth connecting more money and investing in more lines, etc., Google does exactly what you complain about every day through search engines. They are marketers who make money just to do the search engine work to make sure a website pulls up on the first page of results of Google. The companies who don't pay don't have much of a chance of making real money in online business. So what you're complaining about already exists via Google, who benefits from this regulation staying in place. Your argument is moot. That's after I pointed out that basically everything he said was crazy. And let's see if we can, right there, right above me. And let's see. The ISPs who made the investment to the bandwidth connecting more money and investing more lines. We've already noted that ISPs have said under oath, effectively, that it's not harming investment. And a lot of the ISPs get massively funded by the taxpayer. We're talking that most, I think it was something like $200 billion has been allocated in public funds towards ISPs to roll out internet infrastructure over the last 25 years. 200 billion. And from that, the National Network Broadband Infrastructure Plan, or something similar like that, said that we were supposed to all have 45 megabit down and 45 megabit up connections pretty much nationwide by 2010. One many people who had those. 1 million people who had them by 2015. There's only a select few people who have them now. Most people, 45 megabits up is a pipe dream. And I would love 45 megabits up. Some ISPs have flat out failed in their infrastructure plans. And I seem to have going slow, I'm sorry. I don't know why my stream is suddenly running poorly. It should be running okay. Anyway, let's try and focus so much, and hopefully the stream will come back. But I forgot where I was now. Oh yeah, in states like New York and New Jersey, companies like Verizon were paid extensive amounts of money to roll out fiber to businesses and to homesteads and things, and in most cases they haven't. Most states have, in some ways, dropped off from enforcing the provisions in the contract and holding them to account. Others are years behind. Only in 1 or 2 cases has an ISP actually held somebody to the account for not providing the services they were supposed to. It's odd. Okay, Google does exactly what you complain about through search engines. I can choose any search engine I want. I can manipulate my own site to better deal with their results. That does not alter anything. It doesn't mean that my ISP, who I have little choice of, changes. That's my relationship between me and Google. It's not my ISP deciding what it's going to do and which services it's going to benefit. And if I want to search for my site, it'll still show up my site if I search right. I mean, sure, there are priorities, but it's a search engine. It's not an infrastructure. It's a website. I could be listed in DuckDuckGo. I could be listed in Bing. I could be listed in Google. I could be listed in any of the much smaller niche search engines. But that's my choice. My choice rather than my ISP's choice. They're providing a connection between them. If the ISP decided to take me out of all their search results and then prioritize their own stuff on top of the website, that would be a different matter. That's what net neutrality is about. So the people who don't have much of a chance of making real money in online business, again, as I say, it's not that somebody using an online service, Google, it's the fact that people may never be aware that it exists in the first place because the people writing the infrastructure have decided. Not the service, the infrastructure. Let's see. There's all kinds of crazy much like that. Let's try another one and say this is on the ACLU's somebody else said Ben Mizrahi. So this is ACLU at the worst, trying to make sure the left will dominate the internet. Sometimes I wish the US was a fascist country. It's not anything to do with fascism or the left or the right or anything else. It's literally that this is how it goes. This is that the person providing the connection doesn't stick their thumb on the scales themselves. If I want to use Google, I'll use Google's ranking algorithm. If I want to use Bing's, I'll get different results of the same things. If I use DuckDuckGo again, I'll get a different thing. They're focusing on these online services that anybody can access, anybody can go. But I can choose between my search engines. I can't choose between my ISPs. I only have one that provides broadband. Just the one. And I can't go out and lay my new fiber, new connections, because it's immense amounts of money and it's a natural monopoly. I can go and create my own search engine. I can tweak my search engine to prioritize and to boost my Google page ranking. I can't suddenly tweak my website to appear if Charter or Comcast or AT&T or Verizon or Windstream have decided that my site's going to be blocked and that only their approved sites are going to be permitted. At the same time, there's something called zero rating, which brings on to zero rating, and of course I've forgotten to bring up zero rating. Do we all know what zero rating is? Anybody? Bueller? Okay, those that don't, zero rating is mainly deals with cell phones, but it can apply to home internet connections as well. Zero rating means that if you have a data cap or a data limit, let me show you. For instance, I just started. Let's see. That's, for instance, my data usage for, what's that, for most of May, almost a gigabyte. I use a lot of Wi-Fi, and I'm careful about what data I do and don't use. I don't stream media on it, so it's kind of low. But Um, Zero rating means that if, for instance, my cell carrier zero rated Facebook, then the what looks like a tenth of a gig of data for Facebook would not then count towards that data cap. It would have a zero rating on my data cap. If they zero rated Netflix or Spotify, I could use those services without it impacting on my data cap, without it counting against me, with it being zero rated on my user tally. So that's what zero rating means, and it happens for home internet systems as well. If you've got a data cap, say you're on Comcast or AT&T or any service with a data cap, a zero rated app, zero rated service, be it Netflix or anything else, would not count against that data cap. Often companies like Comcast will say things like their own on-demand services don't count against your data caps. Some of that is makes sense. I mean, it's internal data rather than external data. I mean, you're using it and thing, but they're getting to pick winners and losers in that, and that's a major issue. If I create a new music streaming service, and every major a new music streaming service that focuses on cellular use, and every major cell phone provider has Spotify zero rated, why is anybody going to use my product and use it against their data cap when they can play all the Spotify they want all day long, every day, or Pandora, or whichever service is zero rated? Let's stick with Spotify. They can use Spotify anytime they want, and it not count against their data cap. It also means that Pandora, for instance, now has problems keeping users because they may have a better service, but it's still counting against the data cap. So I'm going to like, yeah, but I'm getting near my end of my data, so I'm not going to use Pandora. I'll use Spotify. It won't count against me. And when it comes to home services, I mean, should I use Netflix, which is going to count against me, and worry I'm going to hit my data cap, and then my internet's going to be turned off or throttled, and I won't be able to do anything? Or should I use the Comcast on demand and pay for this service from this zero rated service? It's a way for ISPs to pick winners and losers. It's not letting the market compete. It's actually pretty much against everything that those supporting the repeal, supporting the change back to Title I are claiming. It's the odd duality in the odd change that shows they don't really think things through. They're just claiming any kind of buzzwords they can to make any kind of point. So it's not the most thrilling of things, as John Oliver said in his 2015 piece. You know, it's kind of boring in the abstract. It's kind of boring in the whole, in the totality of things, and that's how they want it to stay. But it needs to be said, and it needs to be done, that it is actually a very important and sorry, back hurts. It's actually a very important issue that affects anybody online. It may affect my ability to do this. I mean, if they decide I'm an undesirable because I'm speaking out, they could, if they wanted, throttle my packets. They could throttle my ability to upload to YouTube. Is that good for anybody? No, it's certainly not good for me. They can decide who they want to win, who they want to lose. And again, a natural monopoly. I can't run lines. I mean, even Google, with their hugely deep pockets, had problems getting access to poles, to dig, to do things, to install Google Fiber, and they had millions, billions to, in effect, to throw at it, and a massive name, and they had difficulty getting access to poles and getting the competitors to move lines, you know, just enough to allow them access to certain things. As if it's all spread out, so there's not quite enough of a gap to run it, but you know, they could squidge up some and things. And I think that's something else that they're opposing right now. It's called one touch make ready, which means that one technician could do this, could do all the modifications for everybody. The one touch on the pole, one person touching the pole to make ready for external things. And that's also strongly opposed. Municipal broadband, strongly opposed. All because the incumbent ISPs want to keep their incumbency. So I'm running out of things to say here, so if anybody has any questions, comments, really isn't sure about anything, wants anything clarified, wants me to go back and touch anything else again, please shout it out, let me know right now in the chat here. There's no such thing as a silly question. Anybody? No? Okay, well then, I want to, anybody? No? Because, you know, I've got all this. If you want to know more about the history of the Comcast thing, which I have basically been referring to throughout with my notes, I'd have actually written it down with sources in a nice little 1600 word essay, which I will also be including in my comment if anybody wants to reference it. I have included sources for everything where I can, and if you need me to add more sources or clarify something, again, get in touch. But if the link I will place in the description at the bottom. It'll be on my site, ktech.co.uk, and otherwise I want to thank you all for watching me prattle on for an hour and 15 minutes. So thank you all for watching, and if you want to get in touch and comment on me, then you can get me either through the comments here or on Twitter at Ktech, or email me to ktech@co.uk, ktech@ktech.co.uk, and that email is GPG enabled for encrypted email if you find your privacy is important to you, as it should be. And I want to thank you for watching. Take care.